Rain poured heavily on the small-town streets, blurring the yellow lights of passing cars as Officer Ryan Clark sat inside his patrol vehicle, tired and frustrated after a long shift. Just when he thought the evening would end quietly, his eyes caught a black SUV parked oddly near an old diner that had closed hours ago. The wipers swished rhythmically as he watched the motionless figure inside the car. Something about it didn't feel right. He stepped out, his boots splashing in puddles, and walked toward the vehicle. Inside sat a young woman, calm and silent, staring out at the rain as if lost in another world. Her face was unreadable, her posture steady, her hands resting quietly on the steering wheel. "Ma'am, can I see your license and registration?" Ryan asked firmly, his voice carrying a tone of authority mixed with irritation. She turned slowly, her calm eyes meeting his for a brief moment that felt strangely intense. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked softly. Her voice wasn't defensive, just calm, too calm for Ryan's liking. He mistook her silence for arrogance. To him, silence was defiance. His mind began to build stories. Perhaps she was hiding something, or maybe she thought she was above the law. The more he looked at her, the more his pride stirred. "I asked you a question," he repeated, a little louder this time. She sighed and reached for her bag, but her slow movements only fueled his suspicion. The rain grew heavier, tapping against his uniform as he felt irritation rising in his chest. Why wasn't she nervous? Why wasn't she apologizing or explaining herself like everyone else did? Instead, she looked at him with quiet patience, almost as if she pitied him. That look struck a nerve. Ryan's jaw tightened. He felt challenged, without a word being spoken. The wind howled through the empty diner lot, carrying the scent of wet earth and tension. "Step out of the car," he ordered. She obeyed, still calm, her coat glistening with rain. As she stepped under the streetlight, he noticed something familiar in her eyes, but he couldn't place it. There was strength there, not arrogance, not fear, but a quiet strength that made him uncomfortable. She stood still, not arguing, not resisting, just watching him like she knew something he didn't. It unsettled him more than any criminal ever had. The storm around them seemed to echo the unease between them. Ryan didn't know that the woman standing before him was Seagal, daughter of the man whose name carried both respect and power across the nation. He didn't know that this small encounter, born of pride and misunderstanding, would soon unravel his confidence and challenge every belief he held about authority, respect, and humanity. As thunder rolled across the sky, Ryan tightened his grip on the radio, unaware that this night, this single meeting in the rain, was the beginning of a lesson that would change his life forever. The rain had stopped, but the tension in the air was heavier than before. Officer Ryan Clark stood outside the station, his temper still burning from the strange encounter with the woman he had pulled over. Seagal followed quietly, her calm expression never changing, her silence like a mirror reflecting his impatience back at him. Ryan mistook her stillness for defiance, believing she was mocking his authority. Inside, his thoughts raced. Every word she didn't say felt like an insult. "You think you can just ignore a cop?" he muttered under his breath, the sting of pride pushing him to act rashly. He led her to the lamppost, just outside the station entrance, the metal pole gleaming under the wet streetlight. "Maybe this will help you understand respect," he said sharply, clicking the handcuffs around her wrists and securing her to the post. Maya didn't resist, didn't even flinch. She just looked at him, her eyes calm and filled with something that felt like quiet disappointment rather than fear. That look made him uneasy, but he turned away quickly, pretending not to notice. A few pedestrians passing by slowed down, watching in confusion. One man whispered to another, pulling out his phone to record. Soon, more phones appeared, their screens lighting up in the darkness like judgmental eyes. Ryan could feel their stares, but his pride kept him from backing down. She refused to cooperate. He snapped when a young officer asked what was happening. but his words sounded weak even to his own ears. Maya stood still, her posture graceful, her face untouched by anger or embarrassment. The more she stayed calm, the more Ryan felt something inside him twist. Why wasn't she shouting or crying or begging like others would? Why did she look almost peaceful, as if she knew this moment wasn't the end, but the beginning of something bigger? The whispers around him grew louder. Who is she? Why is she so calm? This looks wrong. Ryan tried to ignore them, but deep inside, a quiet voice of doubt began to rise. The streetlight flickered above, casting long shadows across her face, making her look almost ethereal. She turned her gaze upward, her eyes reflecting the light in a way that made her seem strong yet gentle. The longer he watched her, the more uncomfortable he felt. For the first time, Ryan began to question himself, not as a cop, but as a person. Something about this woman didn't fit the image of a troublemaker. She had an aura of dignity that didn't bend under pressure, and as he stood there, pretending to fill out paperwork to distract himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. The sound of murmurs, the cold night air, and her silent strength began to weigh on him like guilt he didn't yet understand. Ryan didn't know it yet, but the lesson he was about to learn would break the walls of arrogance he had built around his heart for years. The night had turned cold, and the drizzle returned, soft but steady, soaking the quiet street outside the police station. Maya Seagal stood calmly beneath the flickering lamppost, her wrists still cuffed, the raindrops tracing delicate lines down her face. Around her, a small crowd had gathered, their whispers blending with the rhythm of the rain. Inside the station, Officer Ryan Clark tried to ignore the growing knot in his stomach. Something about this situation didn't feel right anymore. His pride still whispered that he had done the right thing, but a deeper part of him, the quiet part he often ignored, told him he had gone too far. The front doors of the station swung open suddenly, and out stepped Chief Daniels, his coat flapping in the wind. The moment his eyes fell on Maya, he froze. For a second, he looked as if he'd seen a ghost. "Ryan," he said sharply, his voice slicing through the noise, "what on earth have you done?" Ryan turned, startled by the tone. She refused to cooperate. "Sir," he explained defensively. But the chief wasn't listening. He stared at Maya with disbelief, his eyes wide and voice trembling as he spoke again. "Do you even know who she is?" The crowd fell silent, their curiosity growing. Ryan frowned, shaking his head. "That's Steven Seagal's daughter," the chief said, his voice heavy with shock. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The murmurs among the onlookers turned into gasps. Ryan's heart sank, the color draining from his face. He looked at Maya, standing quietly under the rain, and suddenly everything inside him shifted. The arrogance, the pride, the anger, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow pit of regret. He stepped forward, fumbling with the keys, trying to unlock the cuffs, his hands trembling. "Ma'am, I didn't know," he stammered, his voice breaking. But before he could finish, Maya spoke softly, her tone calm yet powerful. "It's all right," she said, her eyes gentle but firm. "Don't punish him. Just let him learn." Her words silenced everyone. Even the chief, who had been ready to reprimand Ryan on the spot, paused in disbelief. There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger, only compassion. She could have demanded justice, could have humiliated him publicly, but instead, she chose mercy. That act of forgiveness hit Ryan harder than any punishment ever could. He looked at her, guilt flooding his heart, realizing how badly he had judged her, how badly he had judged himself. The rain fell harder now, as if trying to wash away the pride that had blinded him. The chief nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. "Go inside, Ryan," he said quietly. "We'll talk later." But Ryan couldn't move. He stood there, watching as Maya walked away through the misty street, her silhouette fading into the night. That single act of grace would haunt him, not because it shamed him, but because it awakened something he had long forgotten: humanity. The next morning, the air was cool and still, as if the town itself was holding its breath after the strange events of the night before. Officer Ryan Clark hadn't slept much. The image of Maya Seagal standing in the rain, calm and forgiving, kept replaying in his mind like a scene he couldn't escape. He had expected anger, maybe even a lawsuit, but instead, she had chosen forgiveness, something he didn't quite understand. When Chief Daniels called him into his office, Ryan entered nervously, bracing for suspension or worse. But to his surprise, Maya was already there, sitting quietly across the desk, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She greeted him with a small, calm smile. "I'm not pressing charges," she said gently. Ryan's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're not?" he asked, confused. Maya shook her head. "No, but I do want something else from you." Ryan's shoulders stiffened, unsure of what to expect. "Spend a day with me," she continued. "No uniforms, no badges, no authority, just a people. I want to show you something." Ryan frowned, unsure if this was some kind of test. "What could I possibly learn from that?" he asked. Maya's smile deepened slightly. "You'll see." The chief nodded in quiet approval, and before Ryan could protest, he found himself following Maya out of the station. They walked through the busy streets, past people going about their day. Maya greeted everyone with warmth, from the vendor selling flowers to the little boy feeding birds by the park bench. Ryan noticed how her presence seemed to soften even the grumpiest faces around them. "You don't need power to influence people," she said, watching him. "You just need kindness and patience." Her words were simple, but they cut deep. Later, they visited a local shelter, where Maya volunteered every weekend. She helped serve meals, comforted an elderly woman, and listened to a young boy talk about his dreams of becoming a firefighter. Ryan stood quietly, observing her. There was no trace of pride or superiority in her actions. Every smile she gave, every word she spoke, carried genuine care. It made him uncomfortable at first. He wasn't used to this kind of quiet strength. When he finally asked her why she was so calm, she looked at him and said, "Because anger burns energy, and peace builds it. Real power is in calm, not in shouting." That line stayed with him. The way she said it wasn't just wisdom, it was experience. He realized she wasn't trying to lecture him. She was showing him what it meant to live with balance and empathy. By the end of the day, Ryan felt a change he couldn't explain. The arrogance that once made him proud now felt heavy and foolish. As the sun set behind the town, Maya turned to him and said softly, "You see, Officer Clark, strength isn't about control. It's about understanding." And in that moment, Ryan finally began to understand what true strength really was. The next few days turned into a quiet journey of discovery for Officer Ryan Clark, a journey he never expected to take. Each morning, he met Maya Seagal, not as an officer, but as a student of something far greater than law humanity. He followed her through streets he had driven down hundreds of times before, but this time, he saw them differently. On one cloudy afternoon, they walked past a busy intersection where an old woman stood, struggling to step off the curb with her cane. Without hesitation, Maya rushed to her side, offering her arm and a warm smile. The woman's wrinkled face lit up with gratitude, and as Maya helped her across, Ryan felt something stir inside him. It wasn't guilt, it was awareness. He realized how many times he had driven by people like her without noticing. Later, at the station, a small boy came running in, tears streaming down his cheeks, clutching a torn school bag. Maya knelt beside him, wiping his tears and listening carefully as he spoke about losing his puppy. She didn't dismiss his worry as childish. Instead, she comforted him with patience and kindness, promising they'd help find the dog. Ryan stood watching, struck by how easily she connected with people, how her presence calmed even the most troubled hearts. even when a few officers at the station whispered or chuckled behind her back, teasing her for being too soft. She didn't react. She simply smiled and continued her work, her grace untouched by mockery. That quiet strength unsettled Ryan. It was so different from the way he handled disrespect. He had always believed authority demanded fear to gain obedience. But Maya showed him another truth. Real respect comes from compassion, not command. As the day went on, Ryan began noticing the small walls he had built around himself over the years, the cold professionalism, the pride, the habit of hiding emotion behind a badge. He realized how those walls had kept him from truly seeing people as individuals with pain, hope, and dignity. It wasn't just others he had distanced himself from. He had also closed himself off from his own heart. For the first time, Ryan didn't want to change to impress his chief or his peers. He wanted to change for his own peace of mind. That evening, as they walked along the quiet riverbank, the golden light of sunset reflected on the water. Maya spoke softly, her voice blending with the breeze. "You wear a uniform," she said, "but that's not what makes people trust you. It's what you do while wearing it." Her words sank deep, echoing in his thoughts long after she fell silent. Ryan looked out at the horizon, feeling lighter somehow, as if the walls around his heart were finally starting to crumble. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a cop trying to prove himself. He simply felt human. That evening the town was wrapped in a soft stillness after a gentle rain. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh beginnings, and the streets glistened under the dim streetlights. Officer Ryan Clark walked slowly toward the same lamppost where, not long ago, he had made one of the worst mistakes of his life. Each step felt heavier than the last, his mind replaying that night like an old film he wished he could erase. The image of Maya Seagal standing quietly in the drizzle, her wrists bound, her face calm yet dignified, had haunted him since that day. Now, standing in the same spot, he could still see the faint marks on the metal pole where the cuffs had been. The sound of rainwater dripping from the rooftops filled the silence as he waited. Soon, Maya appeared, walking gracefully down the quiet street, her long coat swaying gently with each step. She didn't seem surprised to see him there, as if she had known he would come. For a moment, neither spoke. The night breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine from a nearby garden, and somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed softly. Ryan finally took a deep breath, his voice low and trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, the words simple but heavy with meaning. "I thought strength was about control, about showing power. But you showed me it's about understanding." His eyes glistened, the weight of guilt visible on his face. He had faced dangerous criminals without flinching, but standing before Maya now, he felt more vulnerable than ever. Maya looked at him quietly, her expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, she smiled, small, gentle smile that carried both forgiveness and wisdom. "Then you've already learned more than most," she said softly. Her voice was calm, almost musical, and in that moment, Ryan felt the tightness in his chest ease. It wasn't just her words. It was the warmth behind them. Her forgiveness felt like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. For the first time in years, Ryan felt truly seen, not as an officer, not as someone in command, but simply as a man trying to do better. The streetlight above them flickered, casting soft shadows across their faces. Maya stepped closer, her gaze kind but firm. "We all make mistakes, Ryan. What matters is whether we let them change us or harden us." He nodded slowly, his throat tight with emotion. "You changed me," he admitted. "You made me realize that compassion doesn't weaken authority, it gives it purpose." Maya placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then let that lesson guide you," she said. "The world doesn't need stronger officers. It needs wiser hearts." As she turned to leave, Ryan watched her silhouette fade into the night, the sound of her footsteps blending with the soft hum of the streetlights. The lamppost beside him no longer looked like a reminder of Shamit, looked like a symbol of redemption, and for the first time in his life, Ryan felt at peace. Weeks passed, and the town began to notice something different about Officer Ryan Clark, the once short-tempered and proud officer who barked orders and rarely smiled had turned into a man people now greeted with warmth and respect. His transformation wasn't sudden, it was quiet, gradual, and deeply genuine. Each morning, he arrived at the station earlier than usual, no longer wearing the heavy expression of someone who needed to prove himself. Instead, his face carried a calm determination, the kind that comes from the same officers who once whispered about his arrogance now found themselves listening to his words with admiration. Ryan no longer raised his voice unnecessarily or acted out of pride. He began to handle situations with patience, listening more and judging less. When a young officer lost his temper during a heated argument with a driver, Ryan gently pulled him aside and said, "Control your heart before you control others." Those words, simple yet powerful, echoed the wisdom Seagal had once shared with him. Slowly, the same lesson that had changed him began to ripple through others. One afternoon, Ryan visited a local school after receiving an invitation to talk to students about safety. But instead of giving the usual lecture, he spoke about empathy, fairness, and respect. He told them that kindness was not weakness, and that understanding others made a person stronger than any weapon could. The children listened with wide eyes, and when he finished, one little girl raised her hand and asked, "Sir, what made you think like that?" Ryan smiled softly and said, "A woman once taught me that strength is not in anger, but in calm." Though he didn't mention her name, every word carried the memory of Seagal. Soon, word began to spread quietly through the town about the change in the once arrogant cop. Shopkeepers spoke about how polite he had become. Parents appreciated how he treated teenagers with patience, and even those who once avoided him now waved as he passed by. The same lamppost where he had made his biggest mistake became a symbol of reflection for him. He often stopped there at night, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. He understood now that humility was not about lowering yourself, it was about rising above your ego. The chief, who had once scolded him for his temper, now praised his growth openly, saying, "Clark isn't just enforcing the law anymore, he's living its spirit." Ryan no longer sought recognition or praise. The peace he felt inside was reward enough. He had turned his biggest failure into his greatest strength, and through that transformation, he had earned something no rank or medal could give true respect. The town now saw him not just as an officer of the law, but as a man of honor. A living reminder that change is possible when pride gives way to compassion. Months passed, and the memory of that rainy night slowly became a quiet story, whispered across the town, a story of change, forgiveness, and unexpected friendship. Officer Ryan Clark had continued to live by the lessons Seagal had taught him, turning every day into an opportunity to help others. The once arrogant officer had become a symbol of patience and kindness. He had started a small community class every weekend at the local hall, teaching both children and adults about respect, empathy, and self-control. People came not because they were told to, but because his words carried truth born from experience. On one sunny afternoon, as laughter filled the small hall, a familiar figure appeared at the door. Seagal stood there, dressed simply, no longer carrying the aura of fame or power. She wasn't Steven Seagal's daughter that day, she was just Maya, a quiet soul who had changed someone's life with compassion. Ryan, who was explaining to the class how forgiveness is a strength, not surrender, looked up and froze for a moment. Their eyes met, and in that instant, both of them smiled, a silent exchange filled with gratitude and understanding. The last time they had stood together, rain had fallen between them. Now, sunlight streamed through the windows, golden and warm, as if nature itself was celebrating the peace that had grown from their painful beginning. When the class ended, Maya walked up to Ryan, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor. "You kept your promise," she said gently. Ryan smiled, humility reflecting in his eyes. "You gave me a reason to," he replied. They stood for a moment, surrounded by the laughter of children and the gentle murmur of life continuing around them. Ryan introduced her to the group, not as a celebrity, but as the person who had taught him what it truly meant to serve with heart. The room fell silent as Maya spoke briefly, her words filled with warmth. "We all make mistakes," she said, "but what matters most is what we choose to do after them." The class listened in awe, some smiling, some quietly reflecting. That day, the story of a proud officer and a calm stranger became more than just gossip. It became a tale of redemption that inspired others to believe in second chances. As the sun began to set, Maya prepared to leave, turning once more toward the man she had unknowingly transformed. "You've come a long way, Ryan," she said softly. He nodded. "Thanks to you," he whispered. As she walked away, the wind carried the soft rustle of leaves through the open windows, a gentle reminder of how change begins not with power, but with understanding. And from that day on, everyone who heard their story learned a simple, powerful truth. Sometimes the biggest mistakes are not the end, they are the beginning of something beautiful.